Enotria, the last song released at the end of 2024 for both console and PC through Steam. It was pretty hyped prior to its release, and a lot of people, myself included, had high expectations of it. Enotria, the last song, has stunning visuals fueled by the Unreal Engine 5, a story based on Italian folklore, and a Souls-like combat system. But the question I had going in was, is this game worth playing on console? This review is going to answer that question.
In the beginning, there was silence. Then came the first note. A primordial sound with no one to hear. Music birthed itself as a mirror of reality. And so music created men to listen to itself. In turn, they invented the arts to celebrate the mysteries of creation. They gave light.
Let's start this review, as we always do, by discussing the graphics and technical performance of Enotria, the last song on console. I played it on the PlayStation 5 with performance mode selected, but the game does offer a quality mode if you're willing to put up with a lower FPS in exchange for better graphics. Starting with the graphics, Enotria looks really good, even on console, even on performance mode. It's an Unreal Engine 5 game, so they do tend to look pretty stunning. The Italian landscape is bright and beautiful, while other areas are really dark and haunting. Character models are detailed, the landscapes are realistic, and there's enough variety in the levels that it gets to showcase the developers' efforts. There are towns, high hills overlooking the world, and eerie abandoned churches that are the most memorable. Flowing water doesn't look very good, however. When objects are in extreme distance, they become horribly pixelated. Enemies sort of drop into the map when they load in, and you can see them literally fall into place if you look out for it. Moving on to the technical performance, the game was rough when it first released, but a few patches has improved its FPS and I had very few performance drops. I did have several crashes to desktop, and one time it was in the middle of a cinematic that completely messed up the game even when I reloaded. Luckily, I did have an item that brought me back to the last bonfire, but I had to restart the entire battle again. If I didn't have that item, I have no idea how I would have resolved that issue. Enotria hasn't had a patch since March of 2025, so don't expect any more changes to performance going forward. Apart from FPS drops and crashes, Enotria's UI isn't great. It's hard to switch between weapons in your inventory or even upgrade them as quickly as you would like, since it's all in a single list. Your sorting options don't stick around, so you have to repeat it every time and you can't favorite items. Movement itself feels very floaty, like your character doesn't actually touch the ground, and the game has a large number of platforming sections or narrow walkways that require jumping, and it never works out well. Overall, performance is very mixed on console, and I would strongly recommend that you play on performance mode if you do choose to play this game to minimize your FPS drops.
Pulcinella, the minstrel of change. Arlecchino, the king of theater. Captain Spaventa, the son of Meridiana. Pantalone, the merchant of destinies. Balanzoni, the herald of knowledge. Columbina, the saint of the stage.
I'm just going to briefly touch on the story of Enotria, since if I'm honest, I barely understood it. I mean, I got some of the story beats, but overall, the details are a bit vague. The premise is that the game is set in Italy and the world is a play. Every person in this world has a role. Essentially, they're all actors in this play, hence why everyone wears a mask on their face. People wearing masks can't act against their role, which means nothing in this world can change. The gods are responsible for this, but even they are helpless to change it since they're playing roles as well. You play as a maskless one, a person without a role that can take other people's masks in order to end the play and free the world, or at the very least change the play so it's a bit more functional. The story is confusing because nothing is really explained. I'm sure if you have an extensive knowledge of obscure Italian folklore, you can piece together what's happening here, but for someone like me, it's hard to understand. There are a lot of narrative concepts that are just poorly explained or left very vague. The item descriptions don't really give you much background, and there's a codex, but it's easy to miss pieces of it, and when you do read it, it's like taking a single page out of an entire novel. It's hard to understand the story when you only get snippets of that story at a time. FromSoft Souls games were always heavy on lore and light on the actual story, but they did it in a way that left you hungry for more information. A lot of developers, when they make a Souls-like, take the wrong lesson from that. They think that less information is more, so they don't bother fleshing out their story concepts because they think it's expected from a Souls-like for it to be confusing. But Enotria just has a poorly told narrative that's going to leave you entirely confused at the end, especially when there's a few different endings available. I got the standard ending, and I assume it's the bad ending, but I can only piece together that by the fact that the music was a little sad. Unfortunately, I felt absolutely nothing for the story at the end, which is always a bad sign when you finish a game.
The authors drafted the Canovaccio, a script where the stage was the very world. It narrates the perfect world they envisioned, altering reality forever. And thus, the Canovaccio gripped the world and its creatures in eternal stagnation, trapping all behind a mask and its eternal role.
Alright, let's get into the meat of the review, the gameplay. Enotria is not a good Souls-like. It's pretty standard and probably on the lower end of the Souls-likes I've played. The biggest problem comes from the combat. It's just really bad. There are a ton of concepts put into that combat, but none of them gel together in this cohesive way. You have a ton of weapons to choose from, but the UI makes it hard to sort and select them in a timely manner. You can switch weapons, you'll hold 2 at a time, but you can also switch to 3 different loadouts with different masks and different weapons. This means you can potentially have 6 weapons at a time. But the weapons themselves just aren't good. Swords and sabers attack fast, but they do very little damage. Great swords and hammers do a lot of damage, but they're way too slow and you won't hit anyone. Polearms are OP with the required reach and damage to make them the most effective weapon. But why are the weapons themselves just not good? It doesn't have much to do at the end of the day with the damage scaling or even the speed of their swings. It has to do, in my opinion, with 2 key problems of Enotria: stamina and enemy lock-on. Stamina, even when you try to max it out, is just way too low. Dodging takes way too much stamina, and when you manage to dodge the multiple attack combos every enemy has, you're going to be too tired to hit back unless you have a very quick weapon that deals very little damage and you can get one swing in. Enotria is just not a dodge game. It's clear by how hard it is to adequately gain distance from an enemy, how much stamina each dodge takes, and how terrible the dodge mechanic itself is that you're just meant to parry everything. But parrying is hard to time right, as enemies vary their swings at very odd times, and often will combo for a half dozen or more strikes that you have to parry each blow. Unlike Elden Ring or some other FromSoft games, one parry doesn't get you a free shot. You need to parry enough to fill the enemy's stagger bar, and that can take a lot of parrying. You miss even one time, and you get hit. So dodging is useless, parrying is super hard and ineffective. And to make things worse, your limited stamina recovers very slowly. This leads into the second major problem I had with the combat: enemy lock-on. Enemies have supernatural sight of you and never lose track of your movements, even through walls, even from a great distance. Ranged enemies have auto-aim that never misses, and they can pump out arrows like crazy, often while you're walking across beams or ledges. The developers knew this was a problem early on because they nerfed range damage. It is very frustrating, and you need to parry ranged weapons in order to deal with these archers. But the auto-aim of enemies is also present in melee combat. It doesn't matter how a boss moves, if they're jumping or spinning around, they're always going to be locked onto you, meaning they will 180 on a dime and hit you. If you dodge the first strike of the combo, the boss is just going to follow you to keep attacking rather than comboing in the air like they would in Elden Ring. Imagine fighting Melania in Elden Ring, but with godlike lock-on abilities, so that her waterfall dance always follows you perfectly and you can't dodge because that mechanic is useless. That's pretty much Enotria. The combat is really bad and frustrating. The game does come with 2 difficulty levels: Souls-like and Story Mode. Story Mode lessens enemy health and damage while pumping up the amount of XP you earn. It's far too easy in my opinion, except there are a few bosses that are going to be hard limits on a lot of players, and they're going to prevent people from progressing. Souls-like, on the other hand, is deliberately hard by making even the most standard enemies damage sponges, and you yourself will die from a single hit, even if you upgrade your health. The 2 difficulties are 2 extremes, and I wish they had a middle ground. Story Mode is too easy to satisfy Souls-like fans, but has a number of extremely hard bosses that's going to make it too hard for casuals that it's intended for. Souls-like, on the other hand, is frustratingly difficult even for Souls fans, and unless you're the most extreme masochist or you play the game exactly as intended, you need to focus on a few builds, you're not going to like Souls-like either. The game has a number of status effects on weapons, and they have a rock, paper, scissors weakness and strength formula. You will need to use a weapon with a specific damage type against certain bosses in order to do enough damage to defeat them, unless you're just really obscenely good at the game. But the consequence of that is that you're forced to use the weapons the developers want you to use. If you have a cool sword that you love, too bad, since 3/4 of the bosses and enemies won't be weak to it. The system of strengths and weaknesses are also very poorly explained, using Italian words that are confusing, and also tagging on status effects that make the entire thing even more cluttered. But Enotria isn't all bad for gameplay. The levels themselves are really well designed, going back to that classic Dark Souls style of looping back to bonfires, opening new paths forward, and there are a ton of secret areas to explore and optional bosses to find. If Enotria had fixed its combat before release, I think it could be an easy classic. But even with its good graphics, its interesting setting, and its stellar level design, the gameplay itself just isn't fun or good enough to carry everything else.
In a world of masks, only one without a role can choose their destiny and free this world from stagnation.
Okay, let's go into the pros and cons of Enotria: The Last Song. For the pros, the game looks good. Despite some lingering technical problems, it runs reasonably well on console. The level design is fantastic, with lots to explore outside the main paths. There are a lot of weapons to find and use, along with masks and other items that can switch up your gameplay. But for the cons, the UI is not great for finding items and weapons that you want to equip in a hurry. This is especially bad when you want to upgrade them. Bosses and enemies have a cheat-like lock-on ability, and when it combines with low stamina, it makes dodging very terrible. Parrying is obviously the preferred playstyle by the developers, but this is miles away from a game like Sekiro. The game loves falling. You're constantly walking on planks or ledges, and the developers took a perverse pleasure in putting archers on every single one. And that's it for another review. So, is Enotria: The Last Song worth playing on console? I would say no unless you get it for free, and even then I doubt most players will be satisfied with it. Its combat isn't good enough to satisfy Souls veterans, and its bosses can be too hard for casual players even on story mode. With a main storyline that's going to take you about 10 to 15 hours to beat depending on the difficulty you play and your skill level, it's a hard ask for, $20, $30, $40. I'm the Casual Console Gamer on YouTube, and I'll see you all in the next review.